Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. So we talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Ernst Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. The transfer portal in college football is about to heat up, with more and more guys going to be announcing where they're going to be playing college football next season. But the college football coaching carousel, that's starting to slow down as more and more of the jobs are filled up. And Duke, one of the last bigger schools in college football that had a coaching vacancy, that has been filled with Manny Diaz, the former Penn State defensive coordinator and Miami head football coach. He's been announced as the next head football coach of the Duke Blue Devils. I'm going to get into this hiring of Manny Diaz, what I think about it, and how I feel this will affect the Penn State Nittany Lions and the Duke Blue Devils, and whether Duke can continue the success that Mike Elko has brought to Durham, North Carolina. Now, when looking at Manny Diaz, a lot of people are mixed on him as a coach, because when he was at Miami, yes, it is well documented that he did have some struggles. If you look at his record when he was the Miami head coach, he went 6-7 in 2019, 8-3 in 2020, and 7-5 in 2021, and then he got fired. And granted, that is not the best record in the world, 21-15 and 16-9 in the ACC. But you got to remember that Mike Elko went 16-9 as the head coach of the Duke Blue Devils in 2 seasons. Granted, it is tougher to win at Duke than it is at Miami, and the Hurricanes do expect more as a proud program that won 5 national titles between 1980 and 2005. But still, Manny Diaz did not do a terrible job at the Hurricanes, despite the fact that a lot of Hurricanes fans thought otherwise. They wanted more from Manny Diaz. They wanted him to win more games, get to bigger bowl games, but they're not even doing it right now with Mario Cristobal. Maybe that will come with time. Maybe they'll start to win more games, but Miami's still doing about the same right now. And I don't think Diaz was horrible. The thing with Manny Diaz, though, is he's a great defensive coordinator. He became the Penn State defensive coordinator after he was the Miami head coach. You saw that he was the Miami defensive coordinator before he was the head coach of Miami as well. But when he took the job at Penn State, that's what's gotten him this Duke head football coaching job, because he led Penn State's defense to tons of success in the last 2 years. Their defense was rolling this season. That's not why they lost to Michigan and Ohio State the past 2 years. They have been competitive in a lot of the games because their defense has kept them in games, especially this year when they lost to Ohio State 20-12 and they lost to Michigan 24-15. Both games were close. Penn State's offense couldn't get them over the hump. So Manny Diaz, we know he can coach defense, and he did a good job at Miami on defense. He did an even better job at Penn State because there was more talent. Granted, with Duke not having as much talent, that's going to be intriguing to see if Manny Diaz can be able to have success as the Duke head football coach when he's already been a head coach at Miami and he struggled a little bit to win games, and he's been better as a defensive coordinator, because when you are a guy that's really good on one side of the ball, you have to hire a good coordinator on the opposite side of the ball to be able to have success on both sides, or you will struggle. Take Cliff Kingsbury at the Arizona Cardinals. Their offense was fine, but their defense was absolutely abysmal. So it's the reverse here. Manny Diaz has to get a good offensive coordinator at the Duke Blue Devils to help out their offense, because we know a Manny Diaz-led team is going to be good at defense. And there's a couple reasons why I feel the Duke Blue Devils made this hire of Manny Diaz. Number one, he's already been a head coach in the ACC at Miami. And even though his tenure at Miami wasn't the best record-wise, it still wasn't the worst. He had an above 500 record, and it was his first head coaching job. And now that he's gotten his feet wet again, being the defensive coordinator at Penn State, did an even better job at Penn State than he's probably ever done before. That gave Duke the confidence to say, hey, he's been a head coach in the ACC. We want a guy that's coached in this conference before. He knows the other teams in the conference. His teams have played against those other teams before, so that's a good thing for Duke. The other reason why I think they hired Manny Diaz is because Mike Elko was a defensive-minded head coach. He was the defensive coordinator at Texas A&M before he became the head coach of the Duke Blue Devils. Obviously, he left town and went back to Texas A&M to be their head coach, but Manny Diaz is a defensive-minded coach as well, so they're both defensive coordinators, and Duke obviously wants to have that identity of being a defensive-first team, because when you are not one of the best teams in college football, you have to be able to be good at defense. Look at Iowa, look at Wisconsin. Those teams win games in the Big Ten, even though they're in the West where it's a lot easier, but they win games because their defenses are really good. And Duke in the ACC is not a juggernaut. They don't have many programs that Duke can't compete with. You talk about Florida State and Clemson being at the top of the ACC right now. What if Miami can ever get better? Then those teams might be out of Duke's reach. But every other team's on the table. Duke can beat the Georgia Techs. They can beat the Cal and Stanfords that are coming into the conference. They can beat Boston College and Syracuse. So Duke can be a 7 to 8 win program every single year if they have an identity on the defensive side of the ball, and their offense can be good enough to help them be able to score enough to win. Granted, losing Riley Leonard in the transfer portal, that's a tough tough blow because Mike Elko had success with a dynamic quarterback like Riley Leonard. But in this era of the transfer portal, when you lose guys, you can also bring guys in. So it's going to be Manny Diaz's job to find a way to get good offensive talent into the program, good enough talent anyway, that will be able to help the Blue Devils make bowl games consistently. Mike Elko's already built up this program. They're not a fledgling team like they were at the end of the David Cutcliffe era. This is a better football team now. So Manny Diaz, he's not like he's working with nothing. Mike Elko did a great job. And if Manny Diaz can just continue the success, even if it's just a little bit lower, even if he's not going to be able to take this team to 9-10 wins, if he can just win 7 games a year, then I think this is a good hire. This is what I wrote on Twitter. I said this looks to be a solid hire for Duke. Manny Diaz is a good defensive coordinator, but he will have to prove that as a head coach, his team will have good offense as well. Mike Elko did a great job building up Duke, and if Diaz can win 6 to 8 games a year there, then his job will be safe. Duke is not a juggernaut program. They're not expecting to compete at the top of the ACC. Now, that will be nice. If Manny Diaz can do that, that will set him up for a bigger job, just like Mike Elko was able to get a big job at Texas A&M. And I believe that Manny Diaz can have success. I'm not saying it's going to be a complete success where there's no way it can fail. There's always a chance that a coaching hire can fail. A lot of people thought Manny Diaz would work at Miami. It did not. And then he got fired, even though, again, his record was not bad at 21-15. So there is a chance it doesn't work out. But of all the names that Duke could have gotten, this is a good hire, in my opinion, because he already is coached in the ACC, like I said. He's a great defensive coordinator, so he's got the culture and the mindset of a Mike Elko. If he can continue that trend, then Duke can still be a pesky team that can maybe win some games against teams you're not expecting them to beat and just beat the teams that they should beat. This could be a program that's a solid 7-win, 8-win program. Then I think that Manny Diaz is one of the best hires that Duke could have possibly gotten. And Penn State fans, they're very upset. A lot of people on Twitter that are Nittany Lions fans, they're going to miss Manny Diaz because they know how good the defenses were under Manny Diaz the last couple years. Penn State's defense was championship level good in the Big Ten at least, and possibly for the college football playoff, especially for a 12-team playoff. He had that defense rolling. They're going to have to hire a new defensive coordinator, and it's tough because since Manny Diaz has been hired so late, Penn State has lost out on a couple of candidates that they could have got to be their next defensive coordinator because those guys have already been hired at other jobs. If Manny Diaz had become the Duke head coach maybe a week ago, Penn State could have got one of the hot names on the market for their defensive coordinator spot. Now that can't happen because, like I said, those guys are already off the market. They're already at other programs. So Penn State is going to have to find a way to be able to get a guy that's going to be able to replace what Manny Diaz did to the best that he possibly can. It's probably not going to be as good of a hire, especially at this stage in the game. I know it's crazy that we've gotten to the point in college football where bowls haven't even started yet, and it's too late to hire coaches. It's too late to hire coordinators. Unbelievable in that regard. A lot of teams, they hurried up and they got the job done. They made their hires and firings really quick. Duke, they hired Manny Diaz a little late. Maybe they just wanted to make sure that they knew that this was going to be the right hire. Maybe there was a few other guys that they were possibly looking for the job over Manny Diaz, and when they weren't able to get those guys, they settled on Manny Diaz. That's very likely that's what happened, but it does hurt Penn State. I feel bad for Nittany fans in that regard because it will be tough for them to get a new defensive coordinator at this stage in the game, but they are a top program in college football. Not a top 5, but they are a top 15 program, so I'm sure they'll be fine. They've got a lot of money. I'm sure they'll be able to hire a pretty solid defensive coordinator, but Manny Diaz got this head coaching job because how good of a job he did as a coordinator. You do not get a head coaching job that quickly after you got fired from a job like Manny Diaz did at Miami if you don't do a really good job as a coordinator. So Manny Diaz, he earned this job because of how well he did as the Penn State defensive coordinator the last 2 years. So it's good for Manny Diaz. It's possibly going to be really good for Duke, and it stinks for Penn State. But if Penn State can get a pretty solid defensive coordinator and get a better offensive coordinator, it will even itself out. You can't be too good on one side of the ball and not good enough on the other side of the ball, and that applies for Duke as well. Manny Diaz has to have a solid offense, or him having a really good defense at Duke will not matter. Mike Elko managed to have a good enough offense, even though defense is what they prioritize more. So it's going to be really interesting, but I do think at the end of the day that this is one of the best hires Duke could have possibly made. Maybe there was another guy that might have been a higher profile name, but it is tough to get a guy like that to go to Duke. So Manny Diaz, glad he's getting a second chance as a head coach after he got fired at Miami. I thought he did a solid job there, but at Miami, it was not enough to win 7-8 games, but at Duke it will be. So if Manny Diaz can do that, then this will be a really good hire for the Duke Blue Devils and a smart decision by Manny Diaz to take the job. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below about the Duke Blue Devils hiring Manny Diaz to be their next head coach, and what you think about for Penn State fans that they lost their defensive coordinator at this stage in the game, and whether you believe they'll be able to hire a really good defensive coordinator to replace him, and whether you think that Manny Diaz can succeed at the Duke Blue Devils and be able to to follow in the footsteps of Mike Elko and continue to have the Blue Devils competing in the ACC, and whether you believe that it's more likely that Manny Diaz gets fired as the head coach at Duke, or if you believe that he will do such a good job at the Blue Devils that he'll get an even better job like Mike Elko did at Texas A&M. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I'll see you next time.